everyone. This is Laurel with ResNet. I hope you are doing well and getting ready for the holiday season. We've got a great webinar today, which is the overview of upcoming changes to the ResNet HERS standards, and we're going to cover all of those addenda that you see right there. We have the amazing Gayatri Vijaykumar, who is the chair of SCC 300, and we also have Neil Cruz, who is the ResNet's Energy Modeling Director and chair of the ResNet 301 Task Group. We will have a packed agenda today, folks. So as you think of questions about these different topics, feel free to put them in the question field. We'll get to them, and me and Gayatri might send the response to you, but we are going to hold all questions out loud until the end. All right, Gayatri.
All right, thanks. Can you hear me okay, Laurel?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Yes, so we are going to jump into this. Let me switch to the next slide. Like to start every presentation with what we hope you get out of this. So these are our learning objectives for today. I think we often assume that some people have the same background, so I do want to make sure we do some level setting, make sure everyone who's joining today's webinar understands the relationship between the ANSI standards that we reference as well as ResNet HERS standards. I also want everyone to walk away from this understanding what we mean when we say the building permit date and the mandatory compliance date. That is fundamental to understanding when any of these changes that we're going to discuss today take effect or affect one of your ratings. And then also, this was not advertised initially, but I think it's fundamental as well to help you understand how to find this information on the ResNet website. Most of you are not going to come back to this recorded webinar or the PowerPoint. So I think it's important to help you guys find this information. This is a phrase that always comes to mind when I do a web-based tutorial. You know, if I give someone a fish, you feed them for a day. But the hope here is if we teach you how to navigate the ResNet website and find this information yourself, you can find this after this webinar is over. We will give you some fish, right? We are going to talk about these HERS addenda. We're going to talk about things. There is an interim addendum that we expect that will apply and take effect this year and provide some immediate relief, and Neil will talk about that shortly. We have at least one addendum that will take effect on January 1st, 2026, and we'll talk about what I mean when I say takes effect or is effective. I should preface all of this by saying I'm the chair of SCC 300 and Neil is the chair of 301 Task Group. All the changes we're talking about are fairly limited to things related to calculating the HERS index and your rating procedures. There's plenty of changes that are outside the scope of what we deal with. So just level setting that as well. And so there is a group. You're going to see that there's a rhyme and reason to why those addenda were presented in non-chronological order, and I'm continuing to do that. Or they weren't in numerical order. They are in chronological order in time in reference to how soon they would take effect and affect what you do. And so 98 was listed first because I think that's going to affect you soonest, and then 85, and then this group that we don't actually know the precise date it's going to be required for compliance, but we will talk about that. And then finally, just one fun fact, I'm going to throw a couple in here. Understand the difference between an I and an F. And so I'm just going to give you that spoiler right now. When we say I, that's an interim addendum. Like I said, 98I is what Neil's going to talk about. That's an interim addenda. That's what the I stands for. When it turns into a final addendum, that's when you'll see the letter F after the number. All right, so this is where you grab your camera. Like if I was at the ResNet conference, this is where I'd suggest everyone takes their camera and takes a picture of this. This is so you don't have to take notes throughout today's webinar. This is what you are going to learn today. So take a screenshot if you're at your computer. We are going to talk about these 7 HERS addenda. We're going to tell you when they will be required, or as soon, you know, our rough estimate of when they will be required. We will tell you if we think it's going to impact the HERS index up or down. And then we are also going to help you understand what does it mean for you as a rater. I'm delivering this, you know, we're delivering this presentation to what we think are raters on the call. They're doing the modeling and going on field inspections. So we want you to know, you know, at the time that this becomes required for you, we want you to be prepared in advance for any changes to data collection, field inspections, testing, or models. Okay, so grab that picture. We're going to move on. And again, in terms of providing the right amount of background, these are our ANSI standards. So we got ANSI ResNet 301, we got 380, and then we have ACCA ResNet 310 for HVAC rating. So when we talk about what is required, if you have active ratings right now, and they had a building permit date, and that's in quotes for right now because we're going to get to a point in the presentation where I'll explain exactly what the building permit date means and some alternatives for the actual building permit. If you have a building permit date that's before July 1st of this year, so more than 5-6 months ago, none of the changes we're going to talk about affect you, right? Once you have that permit date, that kind of grandfathers you into a set of requirements that were required at that time. We do not change the goalpost on you. So while we're talking about some changes, it is not retroactive to something that was already permitted. Another change came across mid-year, right? So in the middle of the year, ResNet had adopted another change to their HERS standard saying, we don't want to keep using the 2019 editions, the 2022 editions are out. We would like to advance our HERS ratings to use more current simulation guidance, right? So they made an addendum and it was approved to update to 2022. And so this is for building permit dates on or after July 1st of this year. And so sometimes what happens is you have a project that was, trying to get its permit, never got its permit, and that permit date that you thought you were going to get back in June is now happening in September. And so now you might be asked to switch what software version you were using because you need to make sure that the software is calculating your HERS index in accordance with 301-2022. And so if you have questions about, the best bet is to ask the software provider, whatever software tool you use, ask them, hey, this is the version I'm using. Does it calculate my HERS index in accordance with 2019? Does it do it in accordance with 2022? They are your best source for that answer. So we have the ANSI standards, right? So on the left side, we got the 2022, but ResNet requires that not only do you meet the requirements in the ANSI standard, it's also how many times it's been amended through this Addenda process. So the ANSI ResNet standard has been amended already 4 times. So we have Addendum A, B, C, and E. Another fun fact, you can distinguish between an ANSI addendum and a HERS addendum because an ANSI addendum will always be letters. HERS addenda will always be numbers. Okay, so when ResNet adopted the 2022 standard, it wasn't by itself. It was inclusive of Addenda A, B, C, and E. So again, that suite of requirements is applicable if you have permit dates on or after July 1, 2025. The HERS addenda, which we're going to talk about, are upcoming. So they will have different mandatory compliance dates. So the date is not July 1, what we're talking about. It's dates in the future. Typically, these are going to be dates that are either January 1 or July 1, right? So there's a predictable schedule. So typically, you're just looking for January 1 or July 1. So in terms of teaching people how to fish, so Laurel is going to throw this link into the chat. I'm going to ask you guys to save this link and bookmark it. I've heard plenty of raters complain that they go to their provider's website or try to do a Google search looking for an addendum that they think applies to their ratings and can't find it. Please bookmark this link. I'm going to teach you how to read the information on this page. There's a lot of information that I just said that is actually described right here in the first 2 paragraphs. Up here, it's telling you that currently, ratings being permitted in 2025 and 2026, you're based on the 2022 standards. They can be modified by HERS standard addendum, and we're talking about chapter 3, okay? The mandatory compliance date is this July 1. So that means permits on or after July 1 have to meet these standards. This whole paragraph down here is saying what I said before about not changing the goalposts. So a home with a building permit date before that mandatory compliance date does not have to comply with this new requirement. This new addendum does not apply. If you have a building permit date that's afterwards, right, after the mandatory compliance date, then you do have to comply. We do not change the goalpost. Now, building permit date is the typical thing when you think about your actual authorization to construct a home or a building. There are alternatives. So when I say building permit dates later today, I'm including all these alternatives, okay? So it's the date of the first visit. Most people will not use that one. It's the date of the application of the permit. That is a popular one. The date of the contract on the home. And then for multifamily, the date of the low income tax credit application is usually a good one. Again, you're trying to grandfather yourself into a set of requirements so they don't keep moving. Now, there is a very handy table. So if you look to the right of this website, this HERS voluntary and mandatory compliance. It is a nice PDF chart that summarizes all the addenda and when they were approved by the SMB, our Standards Management Board, and what is the mandatory compliance date. Now, this is a great resource, so if you, Laurel, don't mind, throw that into the chat. Just be careful because the link will break very shortly because they update this fairly frequently. So you can see at the top left corner, it was recently updated in November. So this link will eventually break because they will replace it with a newer version. Okay, so if you're on this website, you have decided to bookmark this. If you scroll down on this same page, you will get to another section that has good resources. So the first one is the Continuous Maintenance Edition of the HERS standards. They call this the CMV. This is a live version. They continuously update this as different addendum get approved. But the thing is, it's continuous and it's kind of current. It might not apply to your rating, right? If you have a permit from 2024, you do not want to look at the continuous maintenance version for that rating and the requirements that apply to that rating. Now, this is probably where you want to be. This is the HERS standards and the addendum. So when you click on this, and I'll ask Laurel to also put this link into the chat if you want to just always jump straight to this page. Now, this will remind you how to get back to the continuous maintenance version if you want to. Again, this is probably not applicable to most ratings if you're trying to just double check a home that's under construction, what the requirements are. You'll probably want one of these frozen copies. And so if you really saw that, if you recently saw this page, you would say it looks very different now. I heard a lot of feedback that it was hard to navigate this page. There was information on here that was not intuitive. ResNet staff was so quick to implement some changes that hopefully improve the usability of this page, right? So we've got our 2 frozen copies. These are 2 PDFs, and it's dependent on a permit date. So as long as you know your permit date, you can click on it. It's a PDF, and it has the HERS standards. It won't look like the continuous maintenance version, but it is a frozen copy of the requirements that apply to your rating based on your permit date. If you were ever looking for some light reading, this is the old MinHERS. It was adopted in 2013. This page used to say the word 2013 a lot. You can see here it says the HERS 2013 edition. That is also a PDF, I think published back in 2017. So that's kind of like the original, and it's been amended multiple times since then. And those amendments are down here, right? So these addenda are also now grouped by their compliance date, so you can jump quickly to the ones that apply to you based on your permit date. All right, so I'm going to hand things off to Neil, and he's going to explain the first addendum on our list, 98I. Go ahead, Neil.
Thanks, Kathy. Yeah, so in, let's see, it was ANSI 301 2022 and Addendum C, we added a requirement to collect the wall orientation for the walls in the home. And what we didn't realize at the time that this was going to have some fairly substantial impacts on certain raters' workflows that we just didn't see coming. And so, as a bit of background on the purpose of this requirement, this originally came from the fact that in certain software it wasn't clear if the software tools were actually modeling the walls in multiple orientations. We'd see files with just one wall, and it wasn't clear if that was a south-facing wall or a north-facing wall, east or west, and of course that will have an impact on the simulation and the modeling results, and ultimately the rating, because those walls have they'll absorb some solar, and depending on where they're facing, it'll impact how much energy the home is using. Not as much as something like windows, but still something that can be important in certain conditions. So either way, just given the disruption related to this change, we decided it's probably best to kind of reconsider how we do this. And so what we've done, I think I have control again. Can I click? Yes, okay. So for this Addendum 98I, we've basically just removed the changes that we added in that Addendum C. So we removed the requirement to collect orientation from the minimum rated features, and in the inspection protocol, we've just removed that from the list there entirely. So we're kind of reverting back to how things were before. We have confirmed that all the software tools are modeling different orientations. It's just a matter of how can you specify orientations when it's important. So we will follow up, our task group will follow up with a new 98 final, which will hopefully strike the right balance between the impact on raters' workflows and accurate modeling. Let's see. And I think it's back to you, Gayatri.
All right. So that was the first one, 98I. We don't know this precise date, but interim addendum are, they're there to provide some immediate relief. So we expect that that will get published. You'll see an announcement. Interim addendum don't go out for public comment. So we expect it will take place sometime in December. So I'm going to talk about just one of the addenda on this page. This is, like I mentioned before, like Neil and I, our groups are focused on Chapter 3 updates. And so we are, you're going to see this one for Chapter 9 and Chapter 1, right? The HER standards have a lot of different things that they are addressing, but the chapter we work on is Chapter 3. So Addendum 85 is something that does take effect on or after January 1. So that means permit dates on or after January 1st. And so this could apply to you. And so what we're talking about are temporarily converted garages. So if you are a rater that works with a production builder that likes to have a model home with a sales center in the garage, and they want that model home to be rated with the sales center in place. A lot of raters will just wait until it gets converted and then do the rating, but sometimes the builder wants it rated sooner. And so what this addendum offers is a way to rate that space while the garage is still a sales office. And I'm realizing I can't even spell garages. That is embarrassing. So if you open up the addendum, you're going to see kind of a summary of what the addendum seeks to do. For this particular case, you're going to see a new definition for a temporarily converted garage. So it's new construction. It has to be less than 1,000 square feet. It has to have a garage door, or if it's sheetrocked over to make it look nice, it just has to be evident that there is place for a garage door. There's a driveway on the other side of the garage door, something like that. It has to be thermally isolated from the dwelling unit. So you'd have to confirm that there's actual insulation between the garage space, the sales center space, and the rest of the dwelling unit. It can have a direct opening if it doesn't have actually a sealed door. A lot of them is just like an archway, so you can go from the model home into the sales center. That's okay. Up to 50 square feet is allowed for that. It cannot be space conditioned using the same space conditioning system for the dwelling unit. So it has to have its own dedicated space heating and cooling if it needs any conditioning at all. And then in terms of blower door tests, there was confusion about like how you would even rate this home that has a sales center in it. Do you include the garage sales center? Do you exclude it? And so this addendum makes it very clear that when you do the blower door test, you can temporarily seal that direct opening to this sales center converted space, but you are going to take this penalty of the 140 CFM 50, tack that on to your blower door result. Here's a screenshot from what the addendum actually looks like. And so this is kind of the track change version. Like you always see these in underline and red font. So this would be in Appendix B once it finally gets adopted into the ANSI standards, right? This is still just a HERS addendum. So we're saying what the change is, you're assessing it, determining whether it is a temporarily converted garage. If it is, that opening that I just described doesn't have insulation in it. So this language here tells you that that opening shall be modeled as an air-filled cavity, same finishes and framing fraction of the adjacent wall. So it doesn't have insulation because you haven't confirmed that there's insulation. So folks will ask, if this is a home type that you tend to rate, will it change your HERS index? And I can just say, maybe. Honestly, it just depends on how you were rating this space before. I don't know how you were doing your blower door before. I don't know if you were taking a penalty on the blower door. I don't know if you were modeling that opening as insulated. So it really, unfortunately, depends on what you were doing prior to Addendum 85. But again, permit dates or the alternatives to the permit dates for these homes that have sales centers, if they're permitted sometime in 2026, then they are going to have to comply with these requirements. And then again, just to kind of recap how you find this information, you go to this page and you scroll down, you're going to see Addendum Mandatory January 1. This is the one we talked about just now. You should certainly check these other two from Chapter 1 and Chapter 9. Again, not talking about it. If you were to click this hyperlink, the best way to find this hyperlink again is to come to this web page. You don't want to Google it and find it. this is what it will look like, right? So you've seen a chart that has this information. You could go to the addendum to find this information that tells you what the mandatory compliance date. Again, permit dates on or after this, or any of those alternatives that I mentioned. Okay, and so this one is the next kind of block of changes, block of addenda that could affect how you perform your HERS ratings. And I'm actually not going to talk about any of them. I'm showing them to you because it kind of demonstrates why we're jumping around in different numbers, right? Neil presented on something that was 98I, right? So it seems like we're skipping a lot of numbers, but it's because we have multiple committees that handle different sections of the ResNet standards. So these, except for 89, all these other ones are not in Chapter 3. Again, these are ones that are coming up on or after July 1st, so they might affect you, right? So you do want to pay attention to them, but that's not something we're going to talk about today. Okay, so this is another group. These are HERS addendum. I grouped these together. It's 83, 90, and 94. These are grouped together because all three of these have gone through public comment. They have been approved. They just have not, a mandatory compliance date has not been established. So I cannot tell you definitively whether these will be required for permit dates on or after July 1, 2026, or January 1, 2027, or something else. So Neil's going to explain at the end of this webinar, like why that decision takes some time and why we don't have the answer right now. But I do want you to understand what the changes are. That way, if you need to change what you do about plan reviews or site inspections or how you convey this information to your builders, at least you know what's coming down the pipe. These are approved. It's just a matter of determining when they will be required. So let's start with 83, and then I'll hand things back off to Neil to explain 90 and 94. So 83 actually is a 83F, so it replaces an interim addenda. So there was a stakeholder that recognized that a grade 1 protocol was not available for a certain product, a certain assembly. So these are CMU walls on the bottom right. They are foam filled, and so they have some R value associated with them. But there was not a procedure to grade this insulation as grade 1 or grade 2. And so by default, it ends up being grade 3 because it doesn't have a grade 1 protocol. So through that interim addendum back in the end of 2024, we developed a procedure to allow this assembly to have access to a grade 1 insulation protocol. And so there is information in Appendix A on how to grade it. There was inspection procedures for the rater when they're on site on how to inspect it. And then in Appendix C, there are some defaults and calculations for like, what is the R value when you're filling these CMU blocks with foam? What are the defaults for R value? How do you calculate the R value for this wall assembly? So for those of you who are asking, will this change my HERS index, right? So for many of you, you don't see this construction type in your neighborhood. So this probably does not affect you whatsoever. If you were doing this, you might notice small differences between the interim addendum and the final addendum. And so whether that changes your HERS index, again, it's up, you would have to check that once it's in your software. But there shouldn't be a strong change between the 83I and the 83F. All right, Neil, let me mute and then you can take them out.
Okay. Yeah, so 90F is intended to improve some of the background assumptions around hot water appliances to reflect some of the latest studies that distinguish mostly between single family and multifamily homes. So previously we kind of had the same assumptions in the software for both types of homes, and all this addendum does, and it kind of builds on previous addendum to change let me click forward here. You can see the actual changes in there you go. In the standard, we're basically adding new lines, and this is really just on the software side to how they implement this, because this is mostly for the reference home calculation. So it doesn't really impact the rater at all. They don't have to collect any additional information, but it will likely result in lower HERS index calculations because overall the amount of energy used for hot water appliances will probably drop. And so that's all there is to 90F. Addendum 94, another relatively simple one, doesn't change or impact the rater's on-site procedure at all. What was discovered is that there was basically there's an assumption in the calculations for ground source heat pump hydronic circulation loop pumps that assumed that they were operating year round. And so what this does, it just modifies that so that the pump is only operating basically when there's a heating or cooling load that's being met by that ground source heat pump. Okay, I think this is GAD3 again.
Yeah, I'll take that one. All right, so we're moving steadily through the different numbers, definitely, again, not in numerical order, but this is chronological order. Those last three, 83, 90, and 94, again, we don't know when they will be required, but they have at least been approved. So switching gears to these two, Addendum 77 and Addendum 82, these actually are not yet approved. These are still open for public comment. The entire addenda is not open for public comment. As we go through the public comment phase, every round, less and less language is open to new comment. So these have been out for a few times, so there's limited language that you can comment on. But we're hoping that today, by explaining, what the addendum do and what is expected of raters, it should be clear. If there's proposed language you want to change, then you still have time. We ask that the public comment period, you can see at the bottom, we ask they delay it to December 7th. So again, this is not required. We still don't know when it'll be required, but trying to prepare you for it eventually being required. So I'll take 77 and I'll hand it off to Neil to do 82. So starting with a heat pump water heater, this is a lovely depiction of a heat pump water heater. And so for those that aren't super familiar with this technology yet, we'll just go step by step, 1, 2, and 3. A heat pump water heater operates like an air source heat pump that provides space conditioning, but it's taking air from whatever space in the house or in the garage that it's located. It's taking heat from that air. That air doesn't have to be hot. This depiction kind of makes it look like it's very hot. It could just be in a regular room, 70 degrees or 68 degrees. It's extracting heat from that air and using that to heat the water, right? So that's step 2. Now, I think a lot of us didn't really think about what happens with the air that's coming out. So what comes out of the heat pump water heater is cold air. And so this cold air is probably about 20 degrees colder. So maybe it's coming out around like 50 degrees. And it's a good amount of air. It's about 200 CFM of air, like a pretty substantial supply register. So when you recognize that there's this much cold air, coolish air coming out of your heat pump water heater, the tendency is it cools down the space that it's located in. And so if that space is getting colder and colder as the heat pump runs to heat up the water, there's a chance that it can affect performance. And research has shown that it does affect the performance of the heat pump water heater if the space it's in is getting colder and colder and colder. So we wanted to address that in the HERS calculation. So similar to how we have HVAC grading and insulation grading, how you install something can affect its performance, which should impact its HERS index. So the first step to doing something like this was to introduce definitions. If we're talking about heat pump water heaters, let's level set, make sure everyone's talking about them in the same way. Let's have a definition for heat pump water heater. Let's distinguish between an integrated one and a split system one. So how this looks like in the addendum, you can see on the right-hand side, this is a snip from Appendix B. So in the service hot water section, you would be asked to identify whether it's an integrated heat pump water heater or a split system heat pump water heater. Again, this is a proposed addendum. It's not final yet, but as you prepare to think about this, think about projects you have that have heat pump water heaters. Is this something you could do? Now, if you haven't seen one before, on the left is an integrated heat pump water heater. On the right is an example of a split system where you have storage tank inside, but the heat pump is outside. The one on the left, the heat pump component is just sitting on top of the storage tank. Now, the next thing to do is this big block of text that's on the right-hand side. I'm going to give it to you in layman's language on the left. So the first one, you have an integrated heat pump water heater, the one that had the compressor on the top. Now, the rater is going to be asked to document if that system is ducted. So it can have ducted intake and ducted exhaust. And then you're also going to be asked, where is it ducting the air to and from, right? So that's something new, a piece of information you were going to have to collect from drawings or once you get on site. Now, if it's not ducted, which is typical, most of them are not ducted right now, or not ducted on both sides. So now you have to measure and record the dimensions of the room that the heater is in. and possibly the net-free opening area. If it's in a closet with a louvered door or grills, in order to get it access to conditioned air to heat the water, you need a calculation, an estimation of the net-free opening area, as well as the compressor capacity of the heat pump water heater. That's probably a new element that you've never had to collect that piece of information for. Both of these, net-free opening and compressor capacity, will have defaults. You can see here, there's a default simple way to calculate it if you don't know how to collect that information from the manufacturer. And for our last one, the split system heat pump water heater, is simply just recording the location of the heat pump as well as the storage tank. So that was in layman's language. Let's talk about it in pictures. So on the left-hand side, that's what a ducted heat pump water heater, it's in a closet, but it's ducted. So the size of closet is not important. The louvered door is not important. It's just, where is it ducting the air to? Is it another conditioned space? And where is it ducting the air from? Is that another conditioned space? A more common one is this one in the middle, where it's in a closet, and they're trying to make sure it has access to conditioned air by having a louvered door. So in this scenario, you want to measure the dimensions of the room that it's in, as well as how much net-free, it's called net-free area of that louvered door. And this is the situation where you'd also need to look at the cut sheet for that heat pump water heater and see how big the compressor is. Now, again, there are defaults available if it's not easy to determine. And the last one is just an open closet or a big open basement, and then you're just confirming what is the volume of the closet. Now, the right side is all the gobbledygook that the software folks have to read. You as a rater do not have to read it, right? You've collected the information that feeds into the software. The software will take that data and do some calculations. So on the left-hand side, will it change your HERS index? And again, this is very unsatisfying, but the answer is constantly maybe right now, right? If you have an integrated heat pump water heater and you have the rated UEF from its cut sheet or from its HRI certificate, and it's 3 or 4, it's a really great UEF, that's great. Under certain conditions, it's going to achieve that rated UEF, and you're going to notice no impact on your HERS index, right? Let's say you already do that ducting practice that was on the screen before, right? Now, other conditions where the heat pump water heater might not have access to enough conditioned air to extract the heat from it, there is an equation on the right side at the bottom. There's an equation based on a research study that was performed that when there's not enough air, the heat pump does not perform as well. So it's like a derate factor that's going to be applied to that UEF or the COP, and it's going to just it's going to get derated, just like HVAC rating, just like insulation grading. The installation matters. So that's going to happen behind the scenes. It's not an equation that you have to learn how to do. That's going to be inside the software based on the data entry you provided in the software. And then the last bit on the heat pump water heater is that heat pump water heaters have to be sized to meet demand. If you undersize your heat pump water heater, you put in a 40-gallon tank for a 10-bedroom mansion, it is not going to meet the demand, which means it's going to switch over to electric resistance. When it switches over to electric resistance, it is not achieving its rated UEF. So again, the software, through this addendum, if it gets approved and then once it becomes required for ratings, that would affect your HERS index. It would cause your HERS index to go up if it is undersized. So again, the answer is maybe. I can't tell you if this will change your HERS index. If you install it properly with enough access to conditioned air and it's sized correctly, you probably will not see a change to your HERS index. All right, I'll hand it back to Neil.
Okay, so next addendum in progress here is Addendum 82. And 82 really goes over the changes to calculations of air conditioner and heat pump performance. This little box up here is what the current standard says about how to model heating equipment and cooling equipment. And really it's not much. All we do is capture the HSPF or SEER or HSPF2 as it may be now. And the standard historically has not communicated to software developers, how should that be used to characterize the performance throughout the simulation. So this standard really makes an effort to standardize a lot of the assumptions around air conditioning and heat pump water heaters, including the distinction between different staging technologies, a single speed machine versus a variable speed machine, the way capacity and efficiency or COP vary at different loads or outdoor temperatures or indoor conditions. If if the unit is cycling, there's going to be some losses related to that. How we capture defrost for heat pumps, the indoor fan power, especially as you're operating at lower loads and the fan is drawing lower power. How to handle supplemental heating, what assumptions go behind that for heat pumps. And then there's always standby power. Usually these systems have crankcase heating that'll come down just to keep the refrigerant and the oil warm as the temperatures outside get colder. So let me move on to just looking at the just looking at the changes to on-site verification. So historically, we've had to capture both the capacity and efficiency of these systems. So the SEER2, HSPF2, and then the capacity at these temperatures. What we're adding to help improve and inform the models and simulation is the EER2 value and the capacity, heating capacity at 17 degrees. Most of this information is available if you look at an AHRI certificate. You can see a lot of these kind of translate over. One thing that's not on an AHRI certificate is the capacity at 17 degrees, but it is in the AHRI directory. So if you can look these up in the directory, you should have access to that. And I think we'll have an ongoing effort working with AHRI to make this kind of data a little more available and easy to access. So those are two new data pieces that you'll have to collect. And then in addition to that, there's information that we need that kind of goes beyond what's in the AHRI certificate. So one of those, and I'm listing a number of them here. If there's a default value, it's bolded here. The first one is the number of stages or speed. So some of this you can find, this is just probably a very tiny for you, but a screenshot from a PDF, and you can see that the compressor has, it's indicated that has an inverter to help with the starting method. But any kind of, if you look at product literature, you should be able to find, one of these keywords. If it's a inverter compressor, variable speed, variable capacity, or modulating, that's an indication that it's a variable. I think a lot of these characteristics, we're going to develop additional inspection protocols over time as people find good and reliable data sources. But for a lot of these, it's just kind of relying on product literature. Next one is the fan motor type, and the options here are either a permanent split capacitor or a brushless permanent magnet, which is also very often referred to as an ECM motor. And so the default option is a permanent split capacitor, which is a less efficient motor. But if you can find in the literature that indicates that, and this is for the blower motor, if it uses an ECM motor, then you can use that option for your rating. The next one is the type of supplemental heating, and this one should be pretty easy to identify just through inspection. If you have a gas line coming in, your backup is going to be a furnace. And then if you have usually you'll see like a breaker on the outside of the indoor unit to indicate that there's a large electric resistant strip heat for the backup. And then if you don't see either of those, then there's no supplemental heating. The last one here is the minimum compressor operating temperature. And you can find this in some product literature. Here's one that goes down to -13 for the compressor before you have to move over to supplemental heating. We have defaults built in case you can't find that. So for single speed, it's 0 degrees. For variable speed, it's -20. And then if it's a furnace backup, we fix that at 40 because that is usually an occupant related kind of option in their thermostat. And we wanted to kind of fix an assumption for that. The next thing I want to talk about, which kind of goes beyond the addenda that Gayatri originally mentioned, is that sometime down the road here, we're going to start developing a new addendum to adopt ANSI ResNet ICC 301-2025. And like the past couple that we just showed you, this one also does not yet have a mandatory compliance date, but the timeline is probably in the next year or two. And so I just wanted to give a quick heads up as to what might be coming with this. So even though it's an entire change in the ANSI standard, this addendum will not actually have that many impacts for raters. From one of the things, very minor one, is we no longer collect EAE for boilers and furnaces, and that's largely because the AHRI no longer reports that. It's no longer in product literature, so there's some default values that can be used. There's a few areas for related to ducts, and so if you have an attic where the ducts are buried, that extra insulation around the ducts will actually help improve the performance of your distribution system. And so what we need to know is how deeply are those ducts buried. So if you can measure down to the top of the ducts, then you'll actually get an additional credit for that insulation that's helping keep that conditioned air at its temperature. Another change, there's a few changes that only really impact how the software handles things. So assumptions around natural ventilation. We are determining how much of the operable window area will be open when it happens, when the occupants do that. So, if you have a lot of operable windows, you can actually get a credit for having that option for natural ventilation, but it's not likely that people will have their windows open, all of their operable windows open anytime it's like advantageous for cooling load. So we've made some assumptions to kind of come to a kind of a good middle ground to how much credit you can get from natural ventilation. And so the actual change in the HERS index for this will depend a little bit on what your specific software tool was previously assuming about natural ventilation operation. The other big change is defining what we call a duct effective R value, and the buried ducts is a big piece of this. The buried ducts will obviously change the HERS index. It'll give you a lower index. But then for other ducts, there's a few other changes in this duct effective R value to account for some of just the conduction and how heat transfer changes at different flow rates for inside the ducts. And so that's all happening, and it'll, again, the impact from the HERS index will depend on what the software tool's assumptions were. So that's kind of what's coming in 301 2025. I think there are other changes that are just not related as much to the rating calculation or data collection procedures, but just wanted to give a heads up about that. So we've mentioned the number of these addenda do not yet have mandatory compliance dates. So I want to take a quick moment here to help explain how we go about the process of deciding a mandatory compliance date. So one of the things, and that's become evident lately, is that it's helpful to group addenda. We want to balance the kind of the number and frequency of changes that the industry sees. And so, with these addenda that have not yet been adopted, we might want to wait for, some of these to wrap up their public review and kind of get finalized before we adopt all of them, and we can adopt them all at once. So there's not like you have one version of a software 1 month and another month. And then any of these addenda that impact the rating calculations, what we want to do is collect beta versions. So gives the software time to implement those addenda and give us the beta versions so that we can perform, the ResNet staff can perform an analysis to quantify how much impact is that going to have on the HERS index. And once we've done that, we hand that information over to the Standards Management Board, and they decide on what the mandatory compliance date should be, which is taken into consideration that there has to be a transition period of a minimum of 180 days for any of those changes that impact the HERS index, and especially those that increase the rating. And as Gayatri mentioned, all the mandatory compliance dates have to be January 1 or July 1. And so just to quickly look at this for a hypothetical example, which is not necessarily too far off from where we are now. So if we had an addendum published today, and then we would kind of coordinate with the software developers to determine when can they have all of those changes, all these changes that we just shared with you that haven't been adopted yet. When can they have those implemented in their software? And maybe it's a few months out from now. Then once we get those beta versions, we can perform our impact analysis where we look at different homes in different climates to see how much HERS index is going to change. Once we've done that analysis, we share that with the Standards Management Board. They have to vote and to approve it. And after that, again, they have to wait that transition period at least 180 days. So that would be if they vote on in June 1st of next year, that would be November. So then the following January 1 would be January 1, 2027. So that is the kind of the earliest mandatory compliance date that we could see for some of these addenda that have not yet been adopted. So that's really all I wanted to make clear there. And here are the key takeaways for each of the addenda that Gayatri and I covered. I'll come back to this, but right now I just wanted to open things up for questions.
Thank you so much, Neil. I really appreciate it. And thank you so much, Gayatri. You guys are amazing. So much information, but so thoughtfully put together and easy to digest. So we appreciate it. So there's a couple of questions that came in regards to like searching the standards and that sort of thing. I want a point of clarification is that the standards.resnet.us, the ResNet HERS standards under continuous maintenance, that is not going to be updated, say, with the garage example, the temporary garage example, until the mandatory compliance date. So you're not going to be able to go and search where you go to standards.resnet.us and find any of the addenda that are not mandatory required yet. And then here is a question. Addendum 82 can add a significant effort to locate the information. Product literature can be difficult to locate to match what is installed. Will there be any efforts to aid the rater to get easier access to manufacturer's data?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. It's something that we really struggle with because one example that people may not really understand or appreciate is you can have a single speed machine with a SEER 2 of, maybe SEER 2 of 16 or 15, and you can have a variable speed with the same SEER, and they're not actually going to perform the same way. And so there's a lot of information that we feel like we need to accurately model these equipment and give them the correct incentive that they deserve. And so I am having ongoing conversations with AHRI to help make some of this information available. I don't think it would take a whole lot for them to ask that of the manufacturers to provide it so that it's like there's a single place for raters to kind of look that up. And then I'm assuming that over time, we'll build libraries of some of these equipment, so you won't have to look it up again, and you'll get kind of accustomed to some of these. And yeah, some of the motor type, that's going to be a pretty challenging thing. Again, right now, like I was just trying to look up one for the heat pump I have on my house, and it wasn't very easy to find. And it is frustrating because you don't want to take that default penalty of assuming it's a worse motor. So we really need to put some pressure on the manufacturers to help communicate some of this stuff better for our purposes. Yeah, I wish it was cleaner than that.
Right. Here's just a recommendation. You need to have an update on this presentation at the conference to help get the information to a larger audience. Heard, and you guys are planning on that, if I'm not mistaken. So there'll be an update on this content at the conference. Could you clarify could you clarify buried ducts are not ducts in conditioned space?
That's right. So if the ducts are in the attic and they're just buried with insulation, they're technically not in conditioned space.
Okay.
And I'm just going to weigh in. I'm going to add just a little. So sometimes I know our raters do both. They do code compliance and they do HERS ratings, right? So just a reminder that when we're doing a HERS rating, you are rating the installation of the ducts wherever they may be, right? So the ResNet standards are a little bit agnostic. We're not going to say whether it's in conditioned space, just say like, where is this duct? Is it in the attic? Is it buried? Does it have insulation? It's kind of the code or Energy Star or different programs that might say it needs to be considered inside conditioned space, and they have separate criteria. So I'm not sure if that's where the question was going, but the HERS standard is a kind of like a how to evaluate this home based on where all these things are. It never has like requirements to get to Energy Star, requirements to get to code. Like that's kind of what those codes do.
Okay. Thank you. It says, the next one is, it can still be confusing sometimes when to use certain software versions against the permit date. Ecotrope has a nice help screen that lists each version release date, but assigning a permit date for a project to the version to be used is sometimes confusing. Plus, there's a 6-month extension rule, right? Could ResNet produce advice or on this, or would it be up to the software manufacturers? And we have been talking about this. So Neil, I don't know if you want to chime in here.
Yeah, we did attempt to have like a spreadsheet at one point, and it just got out of date pretty quickly.
Yep.
And what I'd like to do, and I'm proposing, is that as we go through accreditation, you know, ResNet could keep. I mean, ResNet needs to be keeping track of this anyway, so we just need to figure out a way to make that information a lot more visible and user friendly for raters. I mean, I can imagine kind of on the most, I'm not promising this, but like in the most user-friendly way, you put in, I've got this software, and this is my date, my permit date. What version can or should I use, right? And it just fills it out, so you don't have to actually look it up in the table, it just tells you. That'd be kind of ideal. And that's, I don't know if we can get there, but even just having a table that we keep updated as we go through the accreditation, that's, you know, because we already have that point where we're modifying things and improving things. So just updating that table and that process, I think is the best interim solution.
And I'm just going to weigh in, just like if you were navigating this website, right? It used to be that we had this list on the HERS software tools. You went to providers, you went down to HERS software tools, and because it was outdated. So if you're like, no, I swear I've seen a list that this is where it used to be. There used to be a sentence here that directed you to kind of an outdated list. It was our first attempt at trying to do what you guys are asking. Like, how do we tie the versions of software to the addendum that are required that people can find by permit date? Because it got so outdated, if you were convinced you'd seen it, it used to be here. And like Laurel and Neil said, like we're trying to figure out a different solution.
Yeah. And I think that answered one of the other questions that somebody had as well. Up next is for heat pump water heaters, is the proposed actual input for compressor capacity, amps, watts, etc. Where is this data found? It's not typically on AHRI certificates.
Yes, correct. It is going to be hard. It's kind of like 82. We need to figure that out. But what we've similarly done, like there are going to be defaults that you're just not going to want to take, right? So the point right now is like there is a default. So I pulled up the actual language because we recognize that was going to be a problem. So the compressor capacity, let's say it's around typically 400 watts. If you can't find that from a cut sheet or the model nameplate, there was a calculation done here where it says where the compressor capacity is not specified, right? So if you just can't find it, you don't feel like finding it, you can take the default, right? You're just not going to want to, but there is a default option, similar to like what Neil was saying for 82.
Perfect. For 90F, hot water service modeling, you said that the HERS scores will improve. Is that both for single family and multifamily units, or does one benefit more than the other?
I think both. I wasn't the one that did the analysis, so I'd have to double check. But at least for single family, I think both. But I can't say for certain.
Okay. If the I8 heat pump water heater is 110 volt plug-in, can we measure the power?
Thinking. Was that Tony asking that
Like
question?
with like a clamp, huh? With like a clamp on amp meter, I guess that's what they're maybe referring to.
Is it as a proxy for the compressor capacity?
I don't know.
I'd have to take
person
that one offline and look. There are certain places in the minimum rated features where we're like, how do you collect this data, right? So I need to cross check if we added language to that table that says it's observed, it's from a cut sheet, or it's measured. Oftentimes we have all three of those things. So it's possible that we need to make sure that that table, right? Because I only have Appendix B here, but there's another table that kind of itemizes like, where can a rater get this information? So I will do that cross check and see if we did include measurement of this information, right? Because like even like combustion efficiency for a boiler, like there's a tiered, like, hey, we prefer that you get it this way, but these are all the options of how you can get combustion efficiency. So I'll have to look into that.
Okay, and I can follow up with the person that asked. If you get me that information, guys, or that would be fabulous. Let's see here. Would it be possible to assign a ResNet person to produce a document in early spring that has all the changes in effect in July, and then another document? Yes, we send out emails basically summarizing what changes are coming down the pike. So yes, we can certainly work on that one.
I want to add to that in case that person was thinking of this. This is where you would go for something related to the permits, right? So these are, if you open this, this looks like a PDF of the continuous maintenance version of the HERS standards. It has all the sections, and the staff has taken the time to incorporate all the amendments adopted as of July 1, 2025, right? So they've done it for July 1, 2025. And if the question is, will they do it, once January 1, 2026 comes, will another PDF show up in this block? And the answer, I think, is yes, right? So right now it's on or after July 1. So after January 1, we'll want to incorporate, right, 85 will take a place, right? So that'll get incorporated and there'll be a new PDF here. So hopefully that is answering that question.
Yep, absolutely. Does the heat pump water heater addenda consider the change in the space heating / cooling load of the home caused by the integration of the heat pump water heater, if not fully ducted to the outside?
I think it did before. So Neil, I don't think that's a new change. Go ahead.
Right. I don't believe it's a new change, but it certainly will be. If it is in Addendum 77. I can't remember if it was done in this 77 or a prior one that we specify, basically any heat exchange with the space surrounding, including heat loss from the tank, that has to be incorporated and accounted for in the cooling and heating loads.
Perfect. And that's the last question in the queue. And we're going to end right on time. So thank you guys so much. Thank you to guys, Reed and Neil, of course, but thank you guys all for attending. All of this is valuable information that you need to keep up with. ResNet will help you, with posts and emails and things like that to make sure that the information that you have is at your fingertips the best we can. I think there'll be a follow-up email. Valerie's going to be sending a follow-up email and be posting the recording of the presentation. So be on the outlook for that.
Thanks, Laurel. Thanks, Neil.
Thank you so much. Happy holidays. Take care.